Well, good morning again, everybody. Oh, you look good, you sound good. If you're joining us online, we give a welcome to you as well. We can't see you, but we do know you're there. You're a camera lens on this side, but we know you're a living, breathing person, and we can't wait till you can join us here and experience what we experience live and in person. To our guest here in the house today, like we said, we don't want to embarrass you, but I hope I get to meet you as soon as the service is done at the guest center. We have a gift for you, just a way to say thanks for being brave, introducing yourself, and for being here today. So last Sunday was our Educator Appreciation Day, and you guys are amazing. You invited your friends. You served at it. Thank you so much for your involvement with that. That was just such an incredible day. So thanks for everybody who served at that and was involved in that. And it was hot. If it was today, it'd be so different. I mean, I'm walking in today after making my lap through the children's areas, and I'm just like, I'm not even sweating. Last Sunday at that point, it was like, I don't know, probably 10, 15 or so. I'm like, I was already sweating last week. So, we're not complaining. It was okay. It was great, but it was just really hot. And anyway, I'm glad that fall is coming. To my left, your right, are these three balloons, which I always want to remind you why we do this. It's not just to celebrate. It is because why we're celebrating. It is because last week at some point, 3 different people crossed the line from darkness to light and committed their lives to Jesus, and we do this as a celebration. And I love the symbolism of that because it reminds us of what Scripture tells us, that every time someone comes to faith in Jesus, it kicks off a party in heaven. And our attitude is we just want to join in the fun and get some of that party down here because heaven rejoices at one person turning from sin and turning to Jesus. And that is what it's all about. Now, full disclosure, when you're listening to me talk and you're looking at me, you're looking and listening to a veteran of the worship wars. Now, I admit, nobody died as far as I know in the worship wars. It wasn't really life-threatening. But boy, it was career-threatening because the first 10 years of my life as a pastor and in professional ministry, I was a worship leader. Eventually was a worship pastor once I was ordained, and I got to fight in the worship wars. Now, for some of you who have been around this church thing less than probably, 10 years or so, you might be like, what does that even mean? Well, substitute the word music, and that's what it was. It was a music war, and it started, I don't know. The worship wars, I think, started in Genesis chapter 4. I mean, the first murder was over worship. So I guess someone did die in the worship wars, but that's not what I'm referring to. Most of what we're referring to happened between 1970-something and the late 1990s, early 2000s, right about the time I'm really kind of cutting my teeth in this. And that's when I'm really having to figure out what this means. And to give you a short version of it, okay, on the surface, what the battle was about is, do we sing the music that was new 150 years ago, or do we sing the music that was new 5 years ago? That's all it was about. I mean, on the surface. I mean, there are some deeper issues, of course. You don't fight over surface things. It's deeper issues. But that was the surface issue. And I mean, it split churches. It just destroyed our witness in America. It was a pretty rough season. If any of you went through that, it was a rough season for the American church as we were trying to figure out who were we. Because on one side, you had the idea that, the church was an institution that was supposed to represent really who we were historically. On the other side, you had those who said, I'll do anything short of sin if it means reaching someone for Jesus. Those two thoughts really can't really work together very well. They're going to clash, and they did clash for decades. And it started before I was born, and I guess it's still going on somewhere in the country, but I mean, it really hit its zenith early on. But it wasn't actually about music. It was really about the concept of worship, the concept of what do I live for, what do I love, and how am I going to behave because of that. It is very deep, because deep inside of every single human being is a desire to worship something. We connect with something. God made us that way. The book of Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon, he said that God has set eternity in our hearts. That there's this God-shaped hole inside of us that yearns to connect. Now, we may not always connect with God. We'll connect with something. We'll worship something. We'll connect deeply with something. We'll focus our mind and our hearts, and we will obsess on something. Maybe it's our spouse. Maybe it's our kids. Maybe it's our job. Maybe it's our music. It's something. Maybe it's our sports. Yesterday was the first Saturday all summer that we finally had college football again. That was a really good day. But I didn't care about the teams playing. But it was a good day for college football fans because we're fanatical about that. We're all going to try to connect with something, and it means something to us. And take it away, and you're going to have a battle. That's human currency. That's the way we people are. Now, the problem is when we turn that same attitude towards God, we're now trying to debate with someone who has already set the rules. We're now debating with someone who has already said, this is how you come to me. This is the attitude you approach me with. This is what you do in response to me. He's already said all of that. But we want to come to him and try to redefine that. We want to say, I want to come to you on my terms. Or we say, well, I'm okay doing this, but I'm not going to do that. Not like those crazy people. And we struggle with that. And that's the issue. The issue is we want to embrace kind of partial contact worship. If you've been around sports, you know that when you're practicing with your teammates, you don't hit as hard, especially in football. Matter of fact, we were instructed specifically, you don't hit the quarterback. The quarterback is the guy who has the ball most of the time. You don't hit that guy because he's worth a lot more than the rest of the team. And I was never the quarterback, so I always resented that. But you were told you don't hit him that hard in practice. Why? Because practice wasn't the game. The game was the game. And in the game, on defense, your goal was to knock that guy out. It was full contact, full on. But when we come to worship, we want to kind of keep practice. We want to kind of pull back and go, I'm not going to hit really hard. I'm just going to kind of, there you go, Lord. That's our problem. He hasn't told us to do it that way. So as we go on in our series, The Greatest Stories Rarely Told, we're talking about this full contact worship, this whole thing of just embracing it. And what does that mean? What does that even mean from the Bible's perspective? And unfortunately, the Bible is not silent on these issues. It talks about it a lot. Worship is covered from beginning to end with the definition that I think is biblical, which we'll get to. But we're in 2 Samuel to talk about this. 2 Samuel chapter 6. I love 1 and 2 Samuel. They're right among my top 5 in the Old Testament books. I love 1 and 2 Samuel because it's this collection of stories built around this theme of how God created this empire, this legacy of King David. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's really amazing. But it's page 210 in the Pew Bible there in front of you, and if you don't own a Bible of your very own and you would like a print Bible, just keep it. It's yours, but it's page 210 in this, but whether you are looking it up here or you're looking it up in your own electronic version or you're looking at it on the screen, I just want you to get into it and realize this stuff will change your life. And this is one of those stories that's not told very often. This truly is one of the greatest stories rarely told. Because most people come through this passage and they're like, I didn't even know that was in there. I understand. It's just not one of the big ones. It is tucked in there in between some major stuff, and it gets overlooked, and yet it has so much to tell us. Now, I want to set the scene just a little bit because it's really the journey of the Ark of the Covenant as King David would do it, which you might be saying, now, who's this King David fella? Because last week, we were just now to Samuel, the prophet, being told or asked by the people, demanded by the people, give us a king. Well, they did get a king. His name was Saul. He was disastrous. Saul rejected God's way. God rejects Saul. It really ends badly. Samuel anoints the actual person who was supposed to be the king in God's timing, and it was the shepherd boy named David, the runt of the litter, the youngest of these sons. He was the last person that should have been anointed king, but he was. And the dynasty that he eventually was allowed to establish lasted nearly 400 years. King David is so important in a Jewish mindset, he is second only to Moses himself. I mean, if you look at the Israeli flag today, in the middle of that bad boy is the Star of David, the same David. It's massive. He is legendary in the Scriptures. He is legendary in Jewish thought. He was amazing. He was this very complex man, a brilliant military tactician, a wiry politician. He was extremely good looking. The Bible says that. He was red-headed with beautiful eyes, which probably leaned into his faults because he was also a ladies' man and had problems with that. And he was the head, he was an absent father and created a dysfunctional family. So he wasn't perfect. But you find this guy who was anointed by God, and he spent the first part of his life running from King Saul, who was trying to kill him. So David spent the first part of his life running. He's this anointed king of Israel, but he's not been coronated yet. He's running, and for like 15 years he's having to run. He's running away, and his best friend is a man named Jonathan, who happens to be King Saul's son, which would make Jonathan the heir to Saul's throne, but God rejected Saul, which meant he broke that line, so Jonathan wasn't going to be king. David was, and Jonathan even acknowledged it, and Jonathan knew that was a good thing. That was their relationship. Incredible buddy story. I just love the relationship between Jonathan and David. But Samuel had another child too. This was a girl. Her name was Michal, and she had the eyes for David. So Saul had an idea. Saul said, hey, Michal likes David. David likes her. Here's my shot. So he says, David, you can have my daughter in marriage, but you need to kill 100 of our enemies. David goes, fine. He kills 200. And he comes back, and now Saul is faced with a dilemma. He's like, well, I guess I got to give him my daughter. I want to kill this guy, but I guess I got to honor my word. So he gives Michal to David. Now, she's happy about it at the time. They get married. You think life's pretty good. Well, now we skip a few more steps. Saul dies. Now, David's king. And in 2 Samuel chapter 5, you have all these tribes rallying to David's side. They're now joining with their new king. David had defeated so many of their enemies that even though most of his rule was marked by war, there was also the beginning of the sound of peace. And there was the beginning sounds of security, something they had never known before. So David was beloved. And David's rule was marked by some pretty bad pitfalls, but also just about the height of what Israel was ever going to be. His son Solomon extended it out even further, but at this point in history, David's the man. And this was right at the beginning of his rule, where he's moving the Ark of the Covenant from where it's at to Jerusalem, which he had conquered from the Jebusites and named it the City of David, a very humble title. But, that's what kings did. They named cities after themselves and they conquered it. So now Jerusalem is his capital. He's ready to go. He's ready to now bring the Ark of God, this chest. We've been talking about it for weeks. This very important object, the symbol of God's presence and power and purpose in the life of Israel. He's about to bring it from where it's at to its home in Jerusalem. This was a special day. And now we turn the page into 2 Samuel chapter 6, where we are today. So I just caught you up with a lot of history. But that's the backstory that leads us into the first 11 verses of where we are. David again brought together all the able-bodied young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months. And the Lord blessed him and his entire household. That did not end the way we expected it to when it started. It started off as this incredible celebration and ends up as a funeral. And we're left looking at this going, what happened? This was a victory dance in more ways than one. David moving the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Lord, or the Ark of God, it's called by a bunch of different names, but it's all the same object. Moving this from Baalah to Jerusalem was as much strategic as it was religious. Where it was in Baalah on the eastern side of Judah put it within just a few miles of Philistine territory, their enemies. And if the Philistines had come in and taken the Ark of the Covenant away, it would have been a monumental blow to them religiously and morally and their morale. It would have crushed them. So David's moving this for strategic reasons as much as religious, but he's moving it to the city of David, Jerusalem. And they have this whole plan in place, and it was a big celebration. They're having a party, and it was exciting. And then you have this weird thing that happens when the oxen stumbles, the Ark of the Covenant gets shaky, starts to fall, and Uzzah reaches out to stop it and saves it from falling into the dirt, and God kills the man. And you look at that and go, well, did God want the Ark of the Covenant just to fall down in the dirt? I mean, was that preferred? Because Uzzah was just saving it. He was keeping it from falling on the ground and becoming defiled, essentially. But see, the issue here, though, is that David wasn't moving the Ark of the Covenant the way God had already told him to do it. Way back in the book of Exodus. Now, for us, that's been a long time. For him, that was a really long time, centuries before. But in Exodus 25, they were told how to move the Ark of the Covenant. And it wasn't on some newfangled cart with oxen. It was supposed to be moved by 4 priests, carrying the Ark of the Covenant using 2 very long poles that went through rings on the side of the chest, and like a sedan chair. And as these priests would have carried it, it would have been so stable that even if one of those guys had died, it would not have fallen. But David wanted to do this his way, and Uzzah paid the price for it. So then David realizes, I cannot take a chance of me or anyone in my household touching this thing. Send it over to the Gittite's house. Don't bring it, send it to Obed Edom. He'll be fine with it. We'll just keep it in his tents. Just keep it as far from me as you possibly can. But then what happens? Obed Edom is blessed by God because there's blessing in the presence of God. No matter how much we may revere his power, and his power can be lethal, but yet there's blessing in his presence because he is the one who loves his children and gives them good gifts. And so Obed Edom is blessed by this, and David finally goes, oh, wait. We got to fix this. We got to fix this. So let's see what happens next in verse 12. Now King David was told, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God. So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. Now, the 2 Samuel version leaves out some details, but there's the parallel version of this story in 1 Chronicles. And in 1 Chronicles 15, we're told that David did it right this time, that he did it exactly as the law of Moses commanded him to. So this time he's getting it right. So now his heart's in the right place. Now his brain's in the right place. He's being obedient. He's doing all the celebrations. And they have reason to celebrate because they're doing this God's way. And now they're excited all over again. Verses 14 and 15 say this, wearing a linen ephod that was like a white undergarment. It wasn't quite like underwear, but it would have been a very pure white, like a baptismal robe type thing. Wearing this linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all of his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. This was even a bigger party than the first time. Now he's got trumpets in there. They're not just doing little small hand instruments. They are blasting the sound everywhere. They got it up on level 11. I mean, they are just celebrating like mad, and the Lord is now smiling down on them. And David is feeling the breath of God at his back. This was a beautiful and wonderful day, but not everybody's happy about it. Somebody always has to have a problem. In verse 16, here's the problem. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. When she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. Isn't it interesting that David's wife is referred to as the daughter of Saul? That's his wife. They're married. My question is, why wasn't she down there with him? But she's up in this window. She's watching. She's gauging what's going on, and she's got, that is so undignified. A king does not dance. A king does not do these things. She despised David. That's a very nice way. In Hebrew, the word basically means she hated David so much she would have killed him if she had a chance. This was not just embarrassment. She hated him, which is why she's not referred to as the wife of the man after God's own heart. She's referred to as the daughter of the king God rejected. Because she's not acting like David. She's acting like her dad. She's acting like the one who was the furthest from God in this whole equation. And she found it beneath David and beneath her that she was associated with him for doing this. Now, here's how it ends, verse 17 through 19. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it, and David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. I mean, it really ended great. I'm glad it doesn't stop at the beginning. We get to this resolution on the end of it. And when I was a young worship pastor, it didn't take me long to find this passage because I was like, wow, what a beautiful example of human nature and how we respond to the presence of God and what we do every single day. Now, before we get to those responses and how that story is showing us that, I want to remind you of a working definition of worship. Now, there's a technical definition, and it's really long, but here's the short version. Worship is about who we love and how we live. That's that fill in the blank, very first one in your notes. Worship is about who we love and how we live. Now, for those of you who know English, it actually should be whom, but it doesn't sound right that way, and I know, don't write me any letters. I know it's supposed to be whom. I know it doesn't matter how it sounds, but people don't remember anyway. Should be whom if you're an English major, but for the rest of us, we're going to say who. Worship is about who we love and how we live. Now, some of you getting hung up on the fact that it should be whom. Just trust me, object of the preposition, okay? Just go with it. But we're going to say who. But worship is about who we love and how we live. It is about our devotion to something and then how we live as a result of that devotion. If that devotion is to God, then how we live reflects how we love God. If we love our children, if we worship our children, then how we live reflects how we worship our children. If we worship our sports, how we live reflects how we worship our sports. You see how that works? It's not the technical definition, but it really works well for helping us get our minds around what's going on in the story and really get our minds around what we tend to do. Because what we love will be what we end up worshiping if we're not careful. Now, if that's the Lord, that's great. But as we see in the story, there's three different responses to this and how worship can really go sideways on us. So the first response we find in here is it's a term I coined. It's not a right form of the word, but it works. And that is the redefiner, as in you redefine it. Okay, this is what David did the first time. He took what God said and he redefined it so it worked for him. He said, I don't know why. I can't read his mind. I don't know why he didn't do it the right way. Ignorance really obviously was not an excuse. A man died and he was king. He was supposed to know this. The king was required by God to read the law of Moses on a regular basis. He should have known this. He didn't, and somebody died, all because he redefined what worship was. We can do that too. The second we elevate our preferences above anything else, we have redefined it because God is the one that defines it. He says, come to me and surrender. He says, come to me in this way. Come to me and do that. But if we are now defining the terms of engagement, we have redefined what worship is. That was David the first time. Now, I hope no one dies if we redefine it. But, someone did in this story. Now, that's the first response. The second response we actually see in the daughter of Saul, a.k.a. David's wife. And this was the adjudicator. She was judging it. She was sitting in a position to actually judge what was going on, and she didn't like what she saw. And so she acted out of judging what was going on. She decided in her heart that this was not how worship was supposed to be. This was not how you were supposed to act before the presence of God and in front of all these people. And so she said, this isn't a good thing, and she hated David for doing this. That was her position. That's where she was. She decided, I don't like what you're... Here's how this works in today's terms. Maybe you're sitting there in a corporate worship setting like this one, and someone's really getting after it over onto your left. And you're like, man, can you not just cool it for 5 minutes and be still? That's adjudicating. You don't know what they've been set free from. You don't know. Maybe they are just acting a fool. I don't know. You don't know either. That's the point. Or maybe you're the rambunctious one, really cutting a jig, and you're getting after it, and you're looking at someone on your right, and you're going, what is wrong with you? Why are you just standing there like the frozen chosen? What? Come on. Don't you feel something? You're adjudicating them now. Now, caveat, because there's a hook here, okay? The hook is this. Your personality will determine largely what you do. Here's what I mean. My personality, as you might imagine, is a little boisterous. So if I'm watching a football game and my team scores, I will lose my voice in celebration, okay? I will go nuts and jump off the couch. So it's not a surprise, and I'm going to be sitting in this place, and I'm going to go nuts, and I'm going to get excited. And when someone crosses that line from darkness to light, then I'm just going to be like, yes, because that's me. I respond that way all the time. But now if you're a quieter person, and I've seen these people, I've watched games with these people, their favorite team will score, and they'll do this. Yes. And I'm like, what? I'm adjudicating them their sports response. Now, if they come in here and they're like, yeah, that's enough for them. But see, if I'm busy adjudicating them and they're busy adjudicating me and we're judging each other, I'm never even going to know that that's just how they express themselves. Because here's the cool thing. The position of worship adjudicator has been filled, and it ain't you, and it ain't me. It's the Lord. He's the one that judges the heart. We're just looking at externals. So if you're just cutting a jig, man, praise the Lord. I don't know. Or if you're not. But I tell you what, if you hit the hallway and you're loud and obnoxious going, man, I can't wait to go have lunch. And in here you're like, bless me if you can. Let's just say we all figured you out pretty quick. So don't be McCall, because that's what she was. She was the adjudicator. Now, those are the two negative examples. But the positive example, the real example, the one we're supposed to emulate, is David the second time, because he was the worshiper. That's the third response to the presence of God. The people that get in the presence of God and they recognize, wow, you have blessed me so much. You've given me so much. You are so, so good to me. Wow. And the response is surrender. This was David the second time. His heart is just as passionate the second time as the first time. He's probably a little more rambunctious the second time. But his brain's in the right spot too. His mind is focused on the Lord. He's doing it God's way, and he's got all that energy and emotion in there with it. He's doing it the Lord's way, and he's completely involved. He's completely surrendered. He's completely just engaged with the Lord. And David was obviously a passionate person. Look at the Psalms he wrote. He is a passionate person. So his response to the Lord's presence should be physical and overt, because that's who he was, obviously. But I'm not giving you a case here to be loud and boisterous. I'm just saying that this was his response. But the response is not about our physical posture. We get so hung up on that. Standing, sitting, hands up, hands down, hands in the pocket, leaning, or dancing, or standing still. It's not about that. It's about what's in your heart. What's going on in here? Because what's in here, who we love, will affect how we live. It will show up in how we do everything. In this incredible conversation Jesus had with a woman that he was talking to at a well, a very scandalous conversation because it was the middle of the day and Jewish men did not approach women in the middle of the day except for something untoward. And he's having this conversation and just changes her life. But in the middle of this conversation, he actually says these statements about worship, because she was discussing the worship war of her day, which was, where does worship take place? On this mountain or in Jerusalem? And Jesus answers the question. He says this in John chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. He says, a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. See, when a worshiper gets in the presence of God, think back to King David, second time, when a worshiper gets in the presence of God, they no longer matter. It's just all about making him bigger, lifting him higher, and lifting him high on our praises, lifting him high on our lives, lifting him high on our behavior. It's knowing who he is, trusting in what he has done, and showing that to people so that they can taste and see of the goodness of God. We don't check our brains in all this. A mentor of mine would often say our faith is first thought truth. That it is logical, it is rational, it is a good thing to meditate on the Scriptures. That is a mental thing as much as it's emotional, and there's nothing wrong with that. We don't check our brain at the door and become a Christian. Quite the contrary, our brains come alive, and we can now ponder the greatness of God. Early scientists would often view themselves as trying to figure out the greatness of God and how God did it. And when they looked through telescopes or they would look through early microscopes, they were trying to figure out how God did these things. It was not a humanistic approach. It was a theistic approach. Because their attitude was, my mind worships God, and I see the greatness of God through a telescope. No wonder the psalmist says that the heavens declare the glory of God. Get up before sunrise and watch a sunrise, and you will watch the sky erupt in the beauty of God. If you don't want to get up that early, watch a sunset. They just look different when you watch the stars kind of disappear. Whatever you do, the point is, our minds worship him too. But our minds are engaged, our hearts are engaged. It is full body. I mean, it is heart, it is mind, it is body. That's worship. That's full contact worship. So the question then becomes, what is your response to the presence of the Lord? What is your response? Because let's be honest, we have been all three. If we're disciples of Jesus, we have been all three, and maybe even at the same time. We may have gone through the same experience and been all three at different points. We've redefined it and said, I want it this way. Or we've said, I sure don't want it the way you're doing it. Or we've said, you love me so amazingly. Let me tell you yes to something big. Let me just surrender. Let me do something to tell the world of the good thing I found. I mean, you can hear the difference in the angle and the response and the heart and the attitude, because that's what Jesus is trying to teach us. That's what the Lord's trying to show us, is that full contact worship isn't about holding something back. It's about recognizing that the only thing we have is what He gave us and what He has put into us. And King David gives us this example of what that means. So it means that when we do music, or when we have teaching, or when we serve, or when we give, those are all parts of worship. But they're not synonymous with worship. It's not like you can say, well, this is worship and this is something else in the service. It's all worship because it's all designed to be an expression of who we love and how we live. The mental part, the physical part, the communion part, where we get to taste it, that's all part of it. And one thing that you as a congregation do so very well, you do a lot of things well, but one thing you do so well is inviting your friends and family. And we've talked about this week in a couple of staff meetings. We talked about how wonderful you all are at doing that. And I mean that sincerely, because the fact that you come back week after week means you love us. And we don't take that lightly, and you love what God is doing here. We don't take that lightly. But when you trust us with your friends, that's a different level. Now you're assuming we're not going to do anything crazy. You're assuming we're not going to do anything off the wall that's going to make you go, "Ooh, I wish I hadn't brought my friend that day." And we know that. So we don't take that lightly, but we did put in your bulletin today one of these for everybody called the Sit With Me cards, little egg-shaped card, and on the front just says Sit With Me. And the idea is that you can have a tool that you can talk to a friend, a family member, a neighbor, and you can say, hey, come sit with me. Because we know that sometimes you need to have like a conversation starter. You got to have something to kind of hand them to go, here. On the back side, you can see it just says there's hope here, and then just our website. Because this is meant for you to tell them something and talk to them. Now, you may have more than one friend that needs this, and I hope you do. We have plenty of these. This is another one of these things we buy by the thousand, okay? I think the last order was like over 2,000. We have a lot of these. We have a bunch. So back at the Info Center, Guest Center, they're all over the place in that lobby. If you need more than one, please take it. Give it to everybody you know. Give it to your neighbor. Give it to your frenemy. Give it to your enemy. Give it to your rival, whatever. Give it to your boss, and just invite them. And is there anything specific that we're asking you to invite them to? No. We're just going to give you a tool that as you go and tell, you can pair that up with come and see what the Lord is doing. Because every week we have opportunities for people to come and to meet Jesus. Every week we have a chance for people to pray and to bring that burden to the Lord with somebody else. Every week we have musical worship. Every week we have a message. On the last Sunday of the month, we have communion. Every week, every other month, we have baptism. So, there's all kinds of just regular stuff that we just get to show people. This is who our God is, and He loves you unimaginably. So that's a tool you can use for that. Because King David gave us such a great example of what we should do in the presence of the Lord. That we got to do it His way. We got to be surrendered. It's His terms. But we understand that worship is about who we love and how we live because of that love. That means heart, mind, body, embrace, not practice worship. Not just kind of pushing at it, but embrace full contact, hard worship. Go after it. Because this is what pleases the Lord when people seek Him in the Spirit and they seek Him in the truth.